On the day I first realized something was seriously wrong, I felt my chest tighten, and a cold wave of disbelief washed over me. I had always thought family was sacred, that blood ties meant loyalty, respect, and shared values. But as I sat in my sunlit kitchen, sipping the tea I'd carefully brewed, the words from my daughter-in-law rang in my ears over and over: "Our son will take my maiden name. It's important to me. My name is Margaret, I'm 58 years old, and for over 3 decades I've poured my heart, soul, and savings into keeping my family stable. My husband passed away 5 years ago, leaving me the responsibility of managing our family estate and looking after my grandson, Ethan, and supporting my son and his family financially. Every month, without fail, I transferred what I called the family allowance, money meant to cover essentials, education, and a little extra for enjoyment. I never asked for thanks, seeing my family happy was enough. Or so I thought. Ethan is 5 years old, bright, curious, and the light of my life. Every morning I wake up thinking about him, about the little milestones I don't want to miss. Yet, the very people I trusted most, the ones who should have shared my values, suddenly seem to have no regard for my feelings, my history, or the family name I've carried with pride all these years. It wasn't always like this. When my son married Julia, I welcomed her with open arms. She was charming, polite, and seemed eager to fit into our family. I remember hosting their engagement party at our house, decorating every corner with flowers, preparing the best dishes I knew how to make, and feeling a swell of pride as everyone complimented the celebration. For months, I had thought, this girl will be good for my son. She will love Ethan, and we'll all be one big happy family. But the first crack appeared subtly. Julia began insisting on small, seemingly trivial things that gradually revealed her true priorities. She wanted Ethan to eat only certain foods, choose particular toys, and wear clothes that matched her personal taste rather than what my son or I preferred. I initially brushed it off as her wanting to help with parenting. I told myself, she's just trying to make her mark. It's harmless. But deep down, a tiny, nagging feeling told me that her influence was growing in ways I couldn't control. Then came the conversation that shattered my calm. My son had just returned from work, looking weary, and Julia pulled me aside with that poised, controlled expression she always wore. "Margaret," she said, her voice smooth but sharp underneath, "I've decided Ethan should take my last name instead of his father's. It's symbolic, you know. He should carry my legacy, not yours." I stared at her, my mind blank for a few seconds. My heart thumped loudly, and I struggled to breathe. My son's face was pale, conflicted, and I could see him silently pleading with me to remain calm. But calm wasn't possible. The audacity of her words, the blatant disregard for the family I had built, the disrespect to my late husband's memory, it was all too much. I tried to speak, to reason, but the words caught in my throat. "Julia. You can't just," I began, but she interrupted, a smirk playing on her lips. "Margaret, I know this is a big change, but it's for the best. You'll understand eventually." Her casual dismissal made my blood boil. How could she call this the best when it erased the very identity I had worked so hard to preserve? For days, I wrestled with my emotions. Anger, disbelief, betrayal, they churned in my chest like storm clouds. I replayed our family history in my head, all the sacrifices I had made, the love and support I had poured into this household. I had bought the house, maintained it, contributed to my son's education, and ensured Ethan had the best start in life. And now, in one breath, she dismissed it all as irrelevant. The tipping point came that evening. As I watched Julia interacting with Ethan, encouraging him to repeat her surname, guiding him in ways that subtly undermined his father, I realized I could no longer remain passive. My grandson's sense of identity, our family's heritage, the respect I deserved, all of it hung in the balance. I decided that a drastic action was necessary. The next morning, I stopped the monthly allowance I had faithfully given for years. I drafted a formal letter explaining that until my concerns regarding Ethan's name and respect for our family were addressed, no further funds would be transferred. The moment I hit send on the email, a mix of relief and anxiety surged through me. I felt righteous anger, like a storm I had been containing finally breaking free, yet I also knew this decision would escalate tensions. Predictably, Julia reacted with shock and thinly veiled fury. My son called me, pleading, trying to mediate, but the conversation only highlighted the growing divide. He seemed torn between his wife and his mother, caught in a storm of conflicting loyalties. And Julia, she made no attempt to hide her resentment, her gaze cold and calculating whenever I entered the room. I sat in my study late that night, Ethan asleep upstairs, reflecting on the path ahead. I knew this wouldn't be easy. The next few weeks would be a battle of wills, emotions, and principles. I had drawn a line, and there was no turning back. But as I stared at a framed photo of my husband holding baby Ethan, a wave of determination surged through me. Family isn't just about convenience or polite smiles. Family is about legacy, respect, and the bonds that survive betrayal. And so my story began, not with calm and peace, but with confrontation, courage, and the resolve to defend what I held dear. Little did Julia know, this was only the beginning of a conflict that would shake our family to its core. The days after I stopped the allowance were tense, suffocating even. Every phone call, every text, every casual comment from Julia felt like a dagger. I tried to remain composed, reminding myself that I was doing what I believed was right, for Ethan, for my son, and for the family name that had been passed down for generations. But the reality was harsher than I expected. It started with subtle digs. Julia would comment on small things, carefully masking contempt behind sweetness. "Margaret, you don't really understand modern parenting," she said one afternoon, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly as she watched me try to help Ethan with his homework. "Ethan needs a fresh start, a new identity. He'll thank me when he's older." Her words made my blood boil. A fresh start? A new identity. Was she erasing the very roots of this child's life? I swallowed my outrage, nodded politely, and forced a smile, but inside, anger roared like a wildfire. I couldn't ignore the reality. The allowance I had given for years had become a lever of influence, and now that I had taken it away, her facade of politeness was cracking. The tension escalated further when unexpected bills began arriving, claiming services supposedly paid for by the family allowance. I discovered charges for tutoring, extracurricular activities, and even a minor medical expense, all supposedly approved by me but which Julia had scheduled on her own. I stared at the invoices in disbelief. Every item was meticulously calculated to drain what I had once offered freely. I called my son to clarify, hoping he would intervene, hoping he would see reason. But he was trapped in the middle, torn between his wife and his mother. "Mom, I don't want to cause a fight. Julia's just trying to do what's best for Ethan," he said, voice hesitant, as though speaking any stronger would trigger an explosion. His hesitation made my heart ache. I wanted him to stand beside me, to protect the family name, but he was hesitant, unsure, paralyzed by loyalty conflicts. Meanwhile, Julia became more aggressive, testing boundaries in ways I hadn't anticipated. She started inviting friends and distant relatives over, subtly excluding anyone who shared my values or who I had specifically invited for family gatherings. She curated Ethan's world, arranging playdates that reinforced her influence while undermining mine. At family dinners, she would correct me in front of Ethan, teaching him that her word was final. I felt the weight of every snide comment and carefully timed instruction. My grandson, oblivious to the tension, began echoing her phrases, her logic, her worldview, and it broke my heart. I realized that staying silent would only empower her further. So I began documenting every interaction, every phone call, every email, every invoice, every instance where she directly contradicted me or attempted to manipulate Ethan's upbringing. I knew I needed evidence, not just anger, if I wanted to regain some control and assert the boundaries I had long neglected. It was during one particularly tense evening that the first major confrontation occurred. Julia had scheduled a pediatrician's appointment for Ethan without informing me, insisting that a different treatment plan would be better aligned with modern standards. I received the confirmation email and felt my pulse spike. The tone of the message was polite but unmistakably authoritative, as though I had no right to question it. I called Julia immediately, my voice firm, deliberate, and edged with restrained fury. "Julia, I need you to stop making these decisions unilaterally. Ethan is my grandson, and these matters are important. You will notify me before scheduling anything, or we will need to reconsider how we handle these expenses and decisions." She paused on the line, and I could hear the faint click of surprise. Then she laughed softly. "Margaret, I'm just trying to make things easier. You don't understand how these modern procedures work. Relax. Everything will be fine." Relax? Her casual dismissal was infuriating. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, hot and consuming. But instead of shouting, I took a deep breath and said, "Fine. If you want to proceed without my consent, I'll have to adjust how I contribute financially. Consider that a warning." Her laugh was sharp this time, less playful, more condescending. "You wouldn't dare. The family allowance is essential for Ethan. You can't withdraw it without consequences." I smiled coldly, although my hands trembled. "Try me." That phone call changed everything. Julia had underestimated me. She had assumed that my financial support equaled compliance, that I would remain passive while she molded Ethan's upbringing according to her wishes. I realized she didn't just want a name change, she wanted complete control, the power to shape the family's future while disregarding the values and legacy that had taken decades to build. Over the next week, tensions escalated further. Julia began speaking to family friends, subtly twisting the narrative to make me appear controlling, unreasonable, even vindictive. I could hear the whispers, feel the sideways glances at family gatherings, and endure the quiet judgment of those who didn't know the whole story. But for every sly comment and veiled accusation, I gathered more evidence, more proof that her actions were deliberate, manipulative, and harmful. I also noticed Ethan starting to hesitate when interacting with me. He looked at me with confusion, caught between the love for his mother and the influence she was exerting over him. My heart ached as I realized that the stakes were no longer just about finances or names, they were about the emotional and psychological well-being of my grandson. One evening, I sat alone in the study, poring over emails and receipts, and a sense of clarity washed over me. I understood what needed to happen next. I had to assert control, protect Ethan, and ensure that my family's legacy, and the respect I had earned over decades, was not erased. Passive resistance was no longer an option. The conflict was escalating, and it was only a matter of time before the next explosive confrontation would take place. I felt a mixture of fear and determination, a potent cocktail that made my mind sharp and my intentions clear. Julia may have thought she was in control, but she had underestimated a grandmother's resolve, a mother's love, and a woman who had spent a lifetime protecting her family. And deep down, I knew that the real storm was about to begin. The morning it all came to a head started like any other, but I sensed something was different. Julia had been unusually quiet the night before, her messages restrained, her tone almost eerily polite. I should have taken it as a warning. It began with a call from my bank. My stomach dropped as the customer service representative explained that several large transactions had been made from my account without authorization. My hands trembled as I checked my statements. There it was, thousands of dollars drained in a matter of hours, charges linked to educational expenses, luxury items, and what appeared to be a new credit card account opened in Ethan's name. I felt my knees weaken. How could she do this? After all the years I had provided for them, after all the trust I had placed in her as my daughter-in-law, she had crossed a line I never imagined she would. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, manipulation, and the blatant disrespect for our family. I immediately called my son. "Have you seen this?" I demanded, my voice shaking, though I tried to keep it steady. Someone is using our money without permission." "Julia?" His hesitation made my blood boil. "Mom, I don't. I think you need to calm down. Let's talk when everyone's home. Maybe there's an explanation." An explanation? I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront her on the spot, to demand justice. But instead, I took a deep breath, reminding myself that clarity and strategy would serve me better than blind rage. I began piecing together the evidence: invoices, receipts, transaction records, emails, and text messages. Each line, each detail, painted a picture of deliberate deception. Then came the shock that cut deeper than the financial betrayal. Julia had gone further than I imagined. She had begun taking legal steps to have Ethan's surname legally changed to her maiden name. A lawyer's letter arrived, addressed formally, stating that this was part of her plan for Ethan's identity and future. My heart raced, and a cold fury surged through me. This was no longer a petty dispute, it was an outright attack on the family legacy I had spent my life nurturing. I could feel my emotions fracturing into fragments of grief, anger, and disbelief. I remembered holding Ethan as a baby, whispering his name with pride, imagining him carrying on the family's traditions, stories, and values. And now, Julia wanted to erase all of that, as if our family history meant nothing. As I sat in shock, trying to steady myself, I also realized something else: Julia had made mistakes. Small, careless mistakes that revealed her arrogance and overconfidence. She had forgotten to mask certain transactions, left her personal email attached to communications, and even referenced me directly in discussions with service providers. It was as if her desire to assert dominance had blinded her to the need for caution. My mind raced with possibilities. Could I use these mistakes? Could I protect Ethan and reclaim some control over this situation? I felt a spark of hope, a lifeline in the chaos. The evidence was here, I just had to act decisively. Over the next few hours, I meticulously documented every misstep. I created folders, scanned letters, saved emails, and recorded conversations. Each piece added to the puzzle, a web of proof that showed Julia's intentions, manipulations, and disregard for both the law and family. I also reached out to a family lawyer I had trusted for years, explaining the situation and providing the evidence I had collected. The lawyer's face grew serious as she reviewed the documents. "Margaret, this is more than just a dispute over a name or allowance. This is an attempt to undermine your authority and manipulate the child's upbringing. You have grounds to challenge everything legally, but timing will be critical." Her words lit a fire within me. Timing had always been my ally, and now it would be my weapon. I understood that retaliation wouldn't be a simple confrontation, it would be a calculated strategy, a way to reclaim respect, enforce boundaries, and protect Ethan from manipulation. That evening, during a casual family dinner, Julia behaved as though nothing had happened. She smiled at Ethan, poured him a glass of juice, and casually mentioned plans for the weekend. But I could see the tension behind her eyes, the barely contained irritation that I was still present, still aware, still a force she could not ignore. I knew the next move had to be precise. I had to confront her, but I couldn't let emotion dictate my actions. I reviewed every detail once more, rehearsing how I would present the evidence, how I would make her accountable, how I would protect Ethan's identity and the family's integrity. The stage was set. As I went to bed that night, I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The storm was building, and soon, the full confrontation would unfold. Julia had overstepped, underestimated me, and assumed her control was unchallenged. She hadn't seen what was coming. I realized something crucial: this wasn't just about money or names. It was about asserting boundaries, protecting the child, and ensuring that no one could manipulate our family's future. The evidence, the lawyer, and my resolve were aligned. And when the confrontation came, it wouldn't just be a fight, it would be a lesson in respect, authority, and consequences. For the first time in days, I slept that night with a sense of clarity. The battle was looming, yes, but I was no longer a passive observer. I was prepared, and I knew that by the morning, everything would begin to change. The morning sun spilled through my kitchen window, but I barely noticed. My mind was entirely consumed with the plan I had spent the previous night crafting. Julia thought she had the upper hand, but every careless step she had taken was a weapon I could wield. Every unguarded transaction, every email sent without encryption, every mention of me in her schemes, it was all there, waiting. I called my lawyer first thing, explaining that I was ready to confront her. "I want to do this at home," I said firmly. "In front of the family. It has to be clear that what she did cannot stand." The lawyer agreed, cautioning me to remain calm and stick to the facts, but I already felt a simmering confidence that no amount of caution could contain. Julia arrived later that morning, dressed perfectly as always, radiating that smug confidence that used to make my blood boil. She greeted Ethan with exaggerated sweetness, unaware that her empire of control was about to crumble. I watched her carefully, noting the subtle signs of tension, the twitch of her fingers, the way her smile faltered when she glanced at me. I began by casually joining her in the living room while she chatted with Ethan. I allowed her to talk, to boast, to hint at her plans to change Ethan's surname and assert her dominance over our family. Every word she spoke, every confident gesture she made, only added fuel to my resolve. Then, with the calmest voice I could muster, I spoke. "Julia," I said, placing my hands firmly on the table, "we need to talk about the decisions you've been making regarding Ethan. And our family finances." Her expression faltered slightly, a flicker of concern crossing her face. "What do you mean?" she asked, though her voice betrayed the slightest edge of defensiveness. I didn't hesitate. I opened my laptop, projecting the first screen of evidence, the transaction records, the invoices, the unauthorized expenses. I let the numbers speak for themselves. She stiffened immediately, and I could see the color drain from her face. "This is what I found," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "Do you see these charges? Do you see the money that was taken without my consent? And these emails," I continued, scrolling to her careless communications with service providers, "show your intentions to change Ethan's surname without even consulting me. You've crossed a line that I will not allow to be crossed." Julia tried to interrupt, tried to laugh it off, tried to claim ignorance, but I was relentless. I presented every piece of evidence I had meticulously gathered, the bank statements, the credit card charges, the lawyer's notes, even messages she had carelessly sent to mutual friends, boasting about her plans. Every proof was undeniable. "You thought you could manipulate the family, bypass me, and assert control," I said, locking eyes with her. "But you underestimated me. And now, everyone can see the truth." Her usual confidence crumbled as my family, called in quietly beforehand, began to witness the confrontation. My son, who had previously hesitated, finally saw the extent of her manipulation. Ethan, innocent and unaware of the storm around him, looked up at me with wide, trusting eyes. My heart ached for him, but the resolve to protect him only hardened. I didn't stop at showing evidence. I took further action, ensuring that the monthly allowance I had been providing would remain suspended. "Effective immediately," I said firmly, "all funds will cease until respect, communication, and proper boundaries are restored. This isn't punishment, it's a lesson." Julia's lips trembled, her usual facade cracking. She tried to argue, tried to reclaim control with emotional manipulation, but the family's presence neutralized her power. Every attempt to redirect blame or assert superiority fell flat against the undeniable facts laid bare. Then came the decisive moment. I presented the letter from her lawyer, threatening legal steps to change Ethan's surname. I explained calmly but with iron resolve that any such action without my full consent and proper legal consultation would be challenged immediately. She realized, in that moment, that her overconfidence had left her vulnerable. For hours, we debated, argued, and confronted the truth. Julia tried desperately to regain her footing, but every fact, every misstep, every piece of evidence worked against her. By the end of the day, her demeanor had shifted from arrogance to desperation. I could see her understanding that she had underestimated both my commitment and my strategic patience. When she finally left that evening, there was a tense silence. She had retreated, humbled, and aware that her position in the family hierarchy had shifted irrevocably. I watched her go, a mix of relief and satisfaction washing over me. I knew she would think twice before attempting to assert unilateral control over Ethan or the family finances again. I spent the next few days reorganizing, reinforcing boundaries, and ensuring Ethan's welfare was protected. The family's trust in me, already strong, had been reaffirmed. Julia, though still present in our lives, had learned that manipulation would not be tolerated, that respect and communication were non-negotiable. In that confrontation, I realized something profound: standing up decisively, calmly, and strategically can restore order in even the most challenging family dynamics. Retribution wasn't about revenge, it was about establishing authority, protecting loved ones, and teaching lessons that would endure. By the time the week ended, the family's rhythm returned, stronger and more respectful. Julia had retreated from her attempts to control, and I had reaffirmed both my role in Ethan's life and the expectations of mutual respect. It wasn't a victory marked by celebration, but by clarity, boundaries, and restored dignity. The storm had passed, but the lessons lingered. I knew now that patience, preparation, and strategic action could turn betrayal into empowerment, conflict into clarity, and manipulation into an opportunity to teach accountability. The days that followed the confrontation with Julia were quieter than I had anticipated, but they were far from peaceful. There was a tension in the house, a careful awareness that boundaries had shifted. Julia kept her distance, careful not to overstep, but the shadow of her previous arrogance lingered. For me, it was a time of reflection, a period to process what had happened and to solidify the changes I had implemented. I spent mornings with Ethan, watching him play in the backyard, his laughter a balm for the stress that had gripped my life. Seeing him carefree, unaware of the tension that had consumed the adults around him, reminded me of why I had acted so decisively. Every smile, every innocent question, reaffirmed the importance of standing up for what was right, not just financially, but emotionally and morally. I also began reviewing the financial aspects more thoroughly. The monthly allowance I had paused was no longer just a punitive measure, it had become a teaching tool. By carefully monitoring the household accounts and expenditures, I ensured that every dollar went toward Ethan's well-being, his education, and his future. Julia had attempted to manipulate not just the name, but the financial security of our family, and I was determined that such control would never happen again. The family, initially hesitant, began to show signs of relief. My son, who had been caught between his mother and wife, finally voiced his appreciation. "Mom," he said quietly one evening, "thank you for standing up." I didn't realize how much was happening behind the scenes. His words brought a mix of pride and sorrow, pride in having maintained my principles, sorrow at the extent of deception that had nearly gone unnoticed. Julia's response over the following weeks was telling. She attempted subtle maneuvers to regain influence, soft words, small gestures, but the family now viewed them with a skeptical eye. Her authority had diminished, respect had shifted toward fairness, accountability, and transparent communication. She had learned, though perhaps begrudgingly, that manipulation and unilateral decisions would no longer be tolerated. I also took time for self-reflection. Confrontation had taught me more than I had expected. I realized the importance of vigilance in family matters, the necessity of setting clear boundaries, and the power of measured, decisive action. It was not revenge I sought, but preservation, of Ethan's well-being, of family integrity, and of my own sense of justice. The lessons were profound. Power is not in passive tolerance, but in active, thoughtful engagement when principles are at stake. Ethan, the true heart of this story, became my central focus. I worked closely with him on small projects, helping him understand the importance of family, respect, and honesty, not in the abstract, but through the example I set. Watching him internalize these values gave me hope for a future where he would be protected from undue influence and where his identity, including his name, would be respected as part of our family heritage. Financial control, previously a tool of support and, unfortunately, manipulation, was now a mechanism to enforce responsibility and respect. I documented everything meticulously, ensuring that Julia could no longer claim ignorance or fairness. The allowance had become conditional on respect for the family structure, communication, and shared decision-making, a lesson she would not forget. Looking back, the confrontation had been painful, stressful, and emotionally exhausting, yet it was also transformative. It restored order, clarified expectations, and reaffirmed my role within the family. I had faced betrayal with strategy, stood firm against unreasonable demands, and ensured that Ethan's interests were prioritized above all else. The satisfaction wasn't in humiliation or retaliation, it was in the clarity, the protection, and the reaffirmation of family values. Julia's behavior changed significantly in the weeks that followed. She remained polite in interactions, though the arrogance and assumption of authority were gone. I could see the tension between her desire to influence and the reality that she no longer could. My son, too, became more assertive, finally understanding that parental guidance was not an obstacle, but a framework for stability and growth. As for me, I embraced the peace that came with control and clarity. I learned that family dynamics could be complicated and that sometimes the hardest decisions were the ones that protected loved ones the most. I realized that power was not in confrontation itself, but in preparedness, observation, and deliberate action. The story of Julia's demand for a name change was no longer just about pride, it was about safeguarding the legacy, the values, and the well-being of my grandson. By the end of that month, our household felt balanced again. Ethan was thriving, the finances were secure, and the atmosphere, though cautious, was healthier. Julia had learned boundaries, and the family had learned to communicate openly about issues before they escalated. There was a sense of equilibrium that had been missing before, and it was deeply satisfying. Reflecting on this experience, I realized the importance of trust paired with vigilance. Family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, accountability, and shared values. I had faced a challenge that tested patience, morality, and strategy, and I had emerged with not just resolution, but wisdom. I understood that standing firm, acting decisively, and prioritizing the well-being of the next generation were the most powerful tools a parent and grandparent could wield. In the quiet moments, when Ethan would climb onto my lap and ask about the world, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. I had protected him, guided him, and ensured that his identity and future were respected. Julia's attempts to control and assert dominance were no longer a threat. Instead, they had become a lesson in resilience, strategy, and the enduring importance of family principles. And if Julia ever questions my actions again, I know I will stand firm, calmly, with evidence and principle on my side. I have learned that protecting loved ones requires courage, vigilance, and sometimes tough decisions, but the reward is priceless: a family that respects one another, a child whose well-being is safeguarded, and a legacy that honors both love and accountability.